our 5th episode of The Final Glass, where my husband and I chat about events in history. We often have very different ideas of almost everything. And so the discussion might get a little bit testy at times, but I think that just makes everything more exciting and also more likely to cover all the history. It's like the show Crossfire, but history. And also, we're married. And there's alcohol.
Crossfire would have been better with alcohol. So our show gets its name from the Oscar Wilde quote. After the first glass, you see things as you wish they were. After the second glass, you see things as they are not. And finally, you see things as they really are. And that is the most horrible thing in the world. So that's our final glass.
It is really generally horrible, the final glass usually. Very rarely is there a final glass where you're like, wow, that's so amazing. But in any case, perhaps you could once again explain why you wear your sunglasses at night.
Yes. So studio lights are too bright for me. I had eye surgery and now they hurt my eyes.
Yeah. Well, our episode today is inspired by the constant stream of news out of the UK about Chinese spies. And the fact that they sort of got off. Because there was, and I think I should do a direct quote here, no evidence that China was a current threat to national security. Also, there's a big giant Chinese mega embassy going up, which is causing some other problems. But before we get into all of that, our first drink.
My first drink will be Ak un Tash un. And
I don't think you say it that. I think you say it together, don't you? Like Akuntashun?
You do say it together, but I was emphasizing how to pronounce it because I even had to look it up. So this is a Lowlands single malt Scotch whiskey, matured in American oak casks. So I love Highlands whiskey, but I especially love Lowlands whiskey. So this should be especially delicious.
So I'm going a bit more basic as I generally do. And I'm actually going to use my very favorite gin in the world for a drink of my own creation once again. So I mix gin and bitter lemon. And the gin, my preference, my number one favorite gin, Tanqueray.
So this is the favorite gin of the Queen Elizabeth.
The Queen Mother.
The Queen Mother. Queen Elizabeth, rest in peace, both of them. Snoop Dogg.
Amy
Winehouse, rest in peace. So
yeah.
one
I'm
person.
in very good company here. This is good stuff,
Indeed.
Right? Okay.
Indeed.
So my drink that I mix with the bitter lemon is some friends of mine who were in Nigeria actually started calling it the bitter Ruthie. So that's what we do call it now.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Delicious, light, and fruity.
Normally, gin is my summer drink. I tend to have seasons for drinks, but there's just nothing like a good gin. It's amazing. Okay, now, so the UK says China is not a national security threat.
Yes.
And please go ahead and build your mega embassy on our critical communications line when you've been having a history of running independent police stations in other countries. Please go ahead and do that, China. And you know what? We know you're not really trying to find out secrets you shouldn't find out. Don't be silly. All awful. Unfortunately, not the first time something like this has happened.
Yeah, the Brits have often been attracted to communism, especially Brits, especially upper class Brits.
Okay, yes. I mean, I feel like I should kind of defend the Brits here. a little bit. It certainly wasn't only the Brits at all. It's just that theirs ended up being the most famous.
Yeah.
And also caused repercussions far beyond Great Britain. There was a whole issue in the United States for 20 years?
Yeah.
Or more over what I'm sure you have figured out by now is what we're going to talk about, the Cambridge Five.
Yeah. So these were, for the most part, upper class Brits, and we'll touch briefly on each one. But what I want to point out is
we would say elite.
Elite. But what I want to point out is that America has no class system. And so,
that's some bullshit.
So
though.
there's no...
I know that's the official line. That's the official line, and we all know that it's bullshit. It is a more permeable class system for sure.
But Americans definitely, there were some ideological spies early on, but Americans after that tended to spy for money. More basic desires than ideology. And the Cambridge Five were definitely ideological spies.
Okay, and this is where the crossfire aspect is going to come in, because I don't think they were ideological spies. I think that is what the shorthand we've used to describe them was. I think that's the official thing, that they were ideological and they were all up in communism and they really believed it. I think they were just narcissists.
Yeah.
I think that was it. And I mean, I guess this is where we're going to start discussing let me just say they were recruited, all of them, in the 1930s. They spied through until they started defecting in 1951 and 1963. And then you had a couple who admitted they were doing it in 64. It all came out in 79. Anyway, 1930s, what was going on?
Yeah, so...
The Great Depression.
The Great Depression was going on. Well, let's touch very briefly on why people spy. So it's generally broken down into mice: money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And with most people, every element is present with most spies. However, in various forms. And one element or two elements are generally going to be much higher than the other two.
Yeah, and my argument on the Cambridge Five is that ego is this is like Freud's wet dream.
Yeah,
I think.
And I think ideology played into a big part of it, with ego being a close second. But
I think the ideology was an excuse for the ego, but we'll argue about this more later.
And interestingly, coercion was an element.
Well, I think coercion was a possible element, but I don't think they gave too much of a shit who knew, because they weren't hiding. There was homosexuality as an issue at that time, and certainly the after effects of these guys being found out was just absolutely horrific on anybody who was gay. It was just terrible what happened afterwards. But I don't think... I think that, again, we try to make it a little bit too easy on them, saying, oh, they were coerced, they were gay, somebody was going to tell. Listen, Donald McLean and Guy Burgess particularly was out, like, walking streets looking for hookups and doing it everywhere. So he wasn't hiding it.
Well, let's briefly touch on who the Cambridge Five were.
Okay. Yeah, we should have done that already, but there's some strong feelings here. So do you want to start?
So Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, Kim Philby, Donald McLean, and John Cairncross.
Yeah. And I do have to admit that I have no love of traitors at all. And I'm particularly disgusted by Kim Philby. He comes off, everything I've read, everything I've looked up with him, he just comes off as so conceited and full of himself, and just so sure that he was so much better, than he had better ideas and what he was doing. Anyway, I'm going to stop now.
So
we can move forward.
Philby was definitely the most famous one,
yes,
and has had the largest number of movies and TV series made about him. And he was the most flamboyant, and he was the highest risk taker.
Yes, but he wasn't the most flamboyant gay. He
yes,
wasn't. Those two terms often get intertwined, and they're not intertwined in this case. He was just very out there.
Yeah, he was the most flamboyant, and he was the highest risk taker of all of these. So it's important to note that the first four, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, Kim Philby, and Donald MacLean were all traditional upper class Brits.
Well, no. Again, we kind of have to walk that back a little bit. Guy Burgess was more middle class.
Yeah.
He was the son of a naval officer.
Yeah. And Cairncross was probably the lowest.
Yeah, he was I would say lower middle class. His
Yeah.
mother was a school teacher, and
Yeah.
I think his father worked in an ironworks.
Yeah.
However, of the Cairncross children, they were wildly successful.
Mm-hmm.
So this was obviously a good family wherever they were from in the social pecking order.
And making it into Cambridge, although it didn't create an upper class, it didn't make you into the upper class, it made you elite.
It did. And I think we should roll back a little bit on Guy Burgess, because he had, for all that he was a little bit, he wasn't of the upper crust, so to say, he definitely felt that he had something to prove his entire life while he was doing this. So for instance, he wore his old Etonian tie every day. He died in that tie in the Soviet Union. You're in the Soviet Union. You're calling yourself a communist. You're about this whole world that's going to be changed. Why are you so attached to this tie? And I think that goes to the heart of why these guys were actually doing it. Mm-hmm. So they were all also heavy partiers.
Mm-hmm. Heavy drinkers,
heavy partiers.
Ran their mouths.
Oh, yeah, they did. And they were acting so suspicious for the years that they were doing things. Everybody kind of thought, oh, that's weird. Oh, that's uncomfortable. Oh, he shouldn't be doing that. But nobody wanted to say anything because they didn't want to, quote unquote, blacken their names. They didn't want to make an accusation that could ruin their reputation.
And this is where, in ordinary Britain, in middle class Britain, this wouldn't have been a problem. But because these guys were part of the elite and some of them were part of the upper class, the true upper class, it became a problem. And so they were viewed as being above suspicion.
Yes.
And so that's how they were able to get away with this for so long.
Yeah, and in some cases, the requisite background checks weren't even run on them. Number one, because they kind of came into the system as World War II was kicking off and people were needed. This was certainly true of Anthony Blunt, who had actually gone to the Soviet Union in 1933 and was still, brought in, because, he's a good guy. He's one of ours. We can trust him. It was just unthinkable that someone in their position would betray their country. But it wasn't unthinkable, was what got me. It wasn't unthinkable. Philby's father had his own issues, one of which was, so he ended up converting to Islam. He was given a slave girl who was like 16 when he was a geriatric senior citizen. And he worked for the king in Saudi Arabia. And he died in 1960. And his last words were, "God, I'm bored." What a just nasty piece of work, if you ask me. But nobody asked me, unfortunately, or I would have said something.
So
had I been alive.
The other important piece to note here is they spied from the 30s through the 60s. And during this...
Well, in Philby's case.
Yeah, in Philby's case.
Yeah, because actually Burgess and MacLean.
Yeah, defected in 1951.
In 1951, yeah.
But the ring continued to operate, so to speak, through the 60s. And this was the worst time for the Soviet Union. And these people knew what was going on. And one of these spies, I think it was it Burgess or MacLean, where two of his case officers...
That was Philby, yeah.
Philby. Two of his case officers were executed.
During Stalin's purges.
During Stalin's purges.
And Philby was like, it happens.
Yeah. So these people knew what was going on in the Soviet Union.
They knew how bad it was.
Yeah, and having visited the Soviet Union in the 30s was especially obvious. And although the Soviet authorities tried to masquerade, they tried to, mashkirovka is the name for it in Russia, which is like a deception. They tried to deceive these people. But 5 minutes on the streets and you would have seen that the Soviet Union was a sick society that was never going to last 1,000 years the way that they predicted.
Yeah. And this goes back to my assessment that for all people love to talk about the Cambridge Five being motivated by ideology. It was narcissism. They were part of the elite of Great Britain. And in the 1930s, the intelligentsia of Great Britain thought that Great Britain's days were over, that the empire was falling, that the future was socialism, communism, the Soviet. This was it's kind of like being at a dinner party in Germany where somebody makes a statement and everybody's like, "Oh yes, that's well known." Everybody knows. And that is the basis. We all know this is going to be. So the ideas that they had actually weren't unusual for that time. So these guys were elite and they thought that Britain was going to fall. So they wanted to move their eliteness over to the new power. So they thought that by doing this, they were making themselves Soviet elites. And so that's why I think it was all narcissism.
And moving in their minds, I think, I mean, there have been some interviews with some of these guys, but in their minds, moving from one intelligence agency to another was a simple task. You're doing the same job, you're just doing it for a different boss. But that was never true, and it certainly wasn't true in their time. When the methods of the British, the MI5 internal security and MI6, the British traditional spy agency that James Bond was part of, their methods and the KGB's methods were not at all the same.
Right. And for all that there are all these complaints about, I mean, and there are things to complain about. There are definitely things that were done wrong in the UK. There are things that were done wrong in the US. There are things that were done wrong in several places. They pale in comparison to the absolute nastiness that was perpetrated under the name of the Soviet Union. And that is something we just really can't lose sight of. We have to, keep an idea of scale here. And we have to keep in our minds that as far as the Cambridge Five understood, they knew what nastiness was happening. And they were okay with it. Didn't bother them. It wasn't happening to them. They were okay with it.
And ironically, those things that British society tolerated, like the flamboyant homosexuality, the rampant partying, the rampant alcohol abuse,
in the Soviet Union.
Was not
cool. The rampant alcoholism is okay. Yeltsin.
Rampant alcoholism was okay as long as you were in power. But if you were an ordinary person and you were caught drunk on the job one too many times, off to the gulag you go. So the offenses...
But also if you weren't caught drunk on the job too many times. I mean, off to the gulag was just like Saturday.
Yeah. So they there had to be some bifurcation in these guys' minds, knowing that the party that they were part of, if the Soviet Union would have won, and if Britain would have turned into a socialist state, the way so many Eastern European countries fell and Latin American countries were falling at the time, that they could not continue their habits and their hobbies and their love of these activities, but they continued to spy. And they did so much damage to the British intelligence community that it took,
and the American intelligence community.
And the American intelligence
well,
community.
I would say NATO as a whole.
Yeah, that it took a generation to recover.
And some things are still showing repercussions.
Yeah.
So these guys began to be discovered with a project that took place in the United States starting in 1943 called the Venona Project. And the Venona Project was basically the U.S. hit upon a very interesting set of circumstances that allowed them to decrypt Soviet messages starting at 1943. And this program, the Venona program, uncovered about just under 350 people who were working for the Soviet government in the US and UK. Now, of that about 350, they haven't even found half. They haven't even identified who about half of them were. But amongst those they identified were the Rosenbergs, Klaus Fuchs, and
Donald McLean and Guy Burgess.
Yes. And so about 1951, it started becoming very clear to Kim Philby, who was in the United States, and the go-between between U.S. and British intelligence, that I believe it was McLean in particular, had been identified, and he needed to go. He needed to leave. He needed to get out before he was caught, because of course he could give them all away. So Guy Burgess, who was falling apart, was sent after to take him. And Guy Burgess was like, oh, I'm scared. I'm going to go ahead and defect too. And this was super problematic because now everyone was looking at Kim Philby.
So there was excellent spy skill with the Soviets recruiting these guys, but there was very poor assessment with the Soviets recruiting these guys because they recruited people who collapsed under pressure. They recruited people who knew each other, which is the death of spycraft. They recruited people who, on one hand, it was positive because these spies, maybe they felt like they had something in common with other people. I imagine it wasn't quite so lonely. But on the negative side, once this began to collapse, it really collapsed quickly.
Yeah, it slowly and then all at once, right? Yeah. So Philby ended up having to go back to the UK. He ended up leaving the Foreign Office. He was MI6, I think.
MI6, yeah.
He was MI6, yeah.
But he was covered in the Foreign Office.
Okay, so he ended up leaving. He became a journalist. He started drinking more, and this man had sex with everyone. So he was doing all of those things which he shouldn't do, and kind of spiraling. By 1955, there was actually a Labour Party member who stood up in Parliament and said, "When are you going to stop covering for Kim Philby? He's a spy." Philby sued him. He had to take it back. But my point is that everybody knew what was going on with Kim Philby, and nobody was handling it.
And he continued,
they were letting it go.
Yeah, and Philby continued to have contacts inside British stations, and in fact with British heads of station, tremendously powerful people who would have dinner with him and who would talk to him as a journalist, which is a terrible idea to start with. But then they would spill more secrets.
Yeah.
So even though Philby was out of the intelligence community, he was out of
touch.
And
they knew that he was under this suspicion.
Yeah, but because he was upper class and he was considered one of them, they never really suspected him.
Right.
And so I'm not sure how many American and British assets he gave away.
Many, including Sovs who tried to defect to the West.
Yeah.
In at least one case, the Sov was trying to defect to the West and had Kim Philby's name ready to give up. Yeah. Kim Philby turned him over. He was snatched and never seen again.
Yeah. So, and then Philby said, how did he put it? He was a bad guy.
Yeah. He said, he was a terrible person.
Yeah.
Okay. So are you. Anyway. So Philby also defected 1963. Philby, Burgess, and McLean all died in the Soviet Union. McLean and Burgess had their ashes brought back to the UK to be spread on their family plots. Philby is buried in Moscow, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Anthony Blunt and John Cairncross were actually uncovered in the 1960s, but they were given immunity because they confessed. Blunt was not very forthcoming with his confession. He was still given immunity. And he
only admitted to what was already proven.
Yeah, he wasn't going to tell them anything else. He said later that it was his biggest regret. I think it was only his regret because he got caught. Yeah. I don't think he actually regretted doing it. And so then in 1979, Margaret Thatcher was like, well, this is some bullshit. People should know about it. And gave them up and talked about it, admitted to the whole thing in front of Parliament. So that is the Cambridge Five. One thing I want to add here, I recently read a book by a fiction book that an MI6 author wrote. It was a really great book. And the premise of the book was that Cambridge wasn't the only place these kind of spy rings were operated. And it really gets you thinking because you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
And some of the comments of the Soviets who did the recruiting was they thought it was just too easy.
Yeah, they never trusted them as much as perhaps they thought they were trusted because it was too easy. The Sovs could not fathom that the most upper class would just be so blasé about betraying their country. It just made no sense to them.
But ironically, Lenin is the one who said, when we come to hang the capitalists, they'll haggle over who sells us the rope. So they should have known that it was naive people. But perhaps the damage would have been even worse if they would have fully trusted, if Stalin would have fully trusted the ring.
Much worse. So That being said, with the Cambridge Five, let's go ahead to our second glass and see things as they are not. Prost.
Prost.
I really do love a good bitter Ruthie.
Yes.
It's good, especially when it's super hot outside and you just sit outside while the sun's going down and you're drinking your Tanqueray.
For me, talking about politics, Scotch, oh, perfect.
Okay, things as they are not.
Yes.
So now we're going to talk about a spy scandal that not as many people know of. Now, if you're Austrian, you know all about this guy. You've learned about him. But outside of that, he is not as well known. And it's insane because he is basically a huge amount of the reason that Austria lost the First World War. And his name.
And coincidentally, he's also one of the reasons that Russia lost the First World War.
You know what? That's actually a good point. We are speaking about Alfred Radel. And Radel is, I think, particularly apropos at the moment because he was born in what is now known as Lvov. So it was Lemberg at that time. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was not Ukrainian. He was German. Well, he was Austrian. But anybody born at that kind of a crossroads part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is going to be a polyglot, and he was. He spoke 6 or more languages, 6 that we know of fluently.
And he was not upper class.
He was not at all. In fact, his family would have been middle class. His father was a railroad clerk. Would have been middle class, but they just kept having kids. They had so many kids. The family was so poor. They often didn't have enough to eat because they just kept popping out kids after kid after kid. So Radel was actually able to leave home at the age of 15. He was accepted to one of the Austrian military academies, and he was flippin' brilliant. So he went from that first academy to the second academy. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a academy that almost never admits anyone who's not nobility. They only had 50 students a year, and Radel managed to get in, which is unheard of, but also not supposed to be heard of at that time. Radel was extremely flamboyantly gay.
Yeah.
And this proved to be a part of the problem. His problem. So, you know what? Can we mention one more thing about the Cambridge Five, even though we didn't do it then, because we're talking about Radel now.
Sure.
So we didn't talk about the after effects of the Cambridge Five. And the biggest after effect was that instead of admitting the problem with these guys was that everybody gave them the benefit of the doubt for being upper class, the British intelligence services said, problem is obviously that they were gay. And so up until the 1990s and even beyond in a lot of cases, it was absolutely horrific the way that homosexuality was treated within the British intelligence system. This mirrors the issues that were happening at the time that Alfred Radel was in the intelligence system and gay.
On the scale of money, ideology, coercion, and ego, Radel definitely spied for money and coercion.
He was, wow. There were photographs. He was also very unable to control himself.
Yeah, and this is pre-World War I. This is, you're talking about the late 1890s. I mean, he went to learn Russian in Kazan in 1898.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about the 1890s. You're talking about a society that was totally different, a huge difference, as there is today, but maybe even more pronounced between village people and people from small towns and people from the big city. And he went from a relatively small town
to Vienna. Small town.
He went to Vienna. Vienna was unique.
Yeah, that was the big capital.
Yeah, it was the capital of Europe. And so it was unique. He moved into a unique world there where
certain people could be gay, and certain people
could not.
And he was a could not.
And he did not have enough money to be gay and to support that kind of lifestyle.
Well, he didn't have enough money to be a military officer.
Yeah, he didn't have enough money
because they did not pay you enough.
Yeah.
But you were expected to uphold a certain lifestyle.
Yeah. And so he, we're not exactly sure, but the Tsarist intelligence service,
sometime probably when he was in Kazan,
recruited him. The Okhrana, as they were called, the Tsar's secret police, recruited him and provided him with some of that money, which he needed to support his lifestyle.
And kept some photographs on file.
Yeah. And so Radel moved into the best possible position that a spy for the Russian intelligence service could be. And he became the head of army espionage.
Well, counter-espionage. Yeah, counter-espionage.
Yes.
But it wasn't like he just showed up in this role. He was extremely talented. And a lot of the things that we take for granted in investigations today are from Radel.
Yeah.
So, for instance,
fingerprint
files. Yeah, he kept fingerprint files.
Surveillance.
Suspects.
Shining a light in people's eyes.
When you're talking to him.
As you're doing to me today.
Yeah.
That I have to wear sunglasses.
That was Radel. That's all Radel all the way.
That's Radel's. The idea is fingerprints and then categorizing them into files so that you can identify an unknown fingerprint against known cards. Those are all his techniques. Amazing.
And many others. He was really brilliant.
Yes.
At this job. He really was.
But where he fell down
was he taught everybody else how to be brilliant at his job too, really, I think.
Yeah. and so he was, the way that he used, the method that he used to communicate with his handlers, rather than in-person meetings, was letters.
Dead drops, too.
Dead drops and letters.
And he gave them a tremendous amount. He gave the Russians everything. They had everything. They had the plans for the infrastructure of the Austrian transportation network. They had the plans for mobilization in case of war. They had plans for fortresses. They had plans.
Defense.
Yeah, defense. 2 years before Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, Radel made a trip to Bosnia, took note of all the fortifications, sent that information to Russia.
So the reason that I say the Russian Empire was defeated because of Radel is because they got they had a very accurate picture of what the Austrian defenses looked like, and they were very poor. But at the same time, they had no idea of what their own forces were, shocking as that may be. And they didn't realize that they were even more poor. They were even worse.
Right.
And so it caused them to underestimate the Austrians and by default overestimate themselves and ultimately lose the war.
Yeah, you saw this kind of repeat itself in World War II, right? Yeah. Especially that great scene in the movie Enemy at the Gates where he's saying the person in the front takes the rifle.
Yeah, the one with the rifle shoots. When the one with the rifle dies.
The one with the ammunition picks up the rifle.
And shoots.
It's like in that 20 years, Russia and the Soviets learned nothing about getting ready for war.
Yeah, and the pre-World War I period was also a period of tremendous societal and cultural change in all of these empires. And Russia was consistently behind. They were always 40 years behind everything.
Yeah, they were behind even before that, though, because my favorite thing that Russia has been behind on was when they changed to the Gregorian calendar.
Yeah.
And they changed to the Julian.
From the Gregorian.
No, they changed to... Which was the one that came first? The Gregorian calendar.
Yeah,
or the Julian calendar. Okay, I'm going to put this as a pop-up so you'll be able to see which is which. But Russia under Peter the Great changed to the new to the one that most of Europe was on, just as Europe changed to the newest one. Yeah. The Gregorian calendar, I think, is anyway. So Peter the Great. This explains everything Russia and the Soviet Union has done throughout their history. Yeah. They're always like 20 years too late.
Yeah. So in this instance, Radel was an excellent spy, and he was discovered through techniques that he himself devised.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was arrested, I should say, not captured, he was arrested at
He wasn't really arrested. He was apprehended.
He was apprehended. We'll say
you of all people
yes.
should make that distinction.
Yes. So he was apprehended at the post office.
No, they caught it. They saw him at the post office.
That's right. Yeah.
Then they used his technique of shadowing to follow him to what was then called the Hotel Clomser.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And then they came into his hotel room and they were like,
"Yeah,
Alfred."
And so they arrested him.
Do the right thing.
They started to interrogate him, and then they allowed him to quote unquote do the right thing. And what was that?
Shooting himself.
About
2 a.m. They gave him a pistol. He shot himself.
Yeah.
Why on earth didn't they take him in for questioning? And that was actually a question that Franz Ferdinand asked when he found out what had happened. First of all, he was upset because he was a strict Catholic and suicide is horrific. And then the second thing was, why didn't you find out the extent of the damage that was done? But they didn't. They were too embarrassed. They wanted more to hide what had happened than to find out what had happened so that they could counteract it.
And
the Cambridge Five.
Yeah. And during his autopsy, they found another potential, in addition to mice, I'm going to add an S onto it, mices. And money, ideology, coercion, ego, and the last S, syphilis.
Yeah, so he was infected with syphilis sometime during his academy days, and it actually did result in him needing to take time off of school. And when they did his autopsy, they found that he was actually suffering from the beginning of tertiary syphilis. So if you look up kind of what syphilis causes in people, certainly risk-taking behavior, increasingly risk-taking behavior, as they begin to become kind of unhinged, maybe.
Don't look at the photos, by the way.
Yeah, gross. Unhinged from reality. His behavior was becoming more and more risk-taking and more unhinged.
Yeah.
And so he was caught. They tried to hush it up. But, and this is my favorite part of this story, they tried to hush it up, but they needed a locksmith to open his flat, and he had a luxury flat in Prague where he was stationed at the time. And so they went and got a locksmith. His flat was opened up. The locksmith went around opening all of the little boxes that he had around the house. They picked up papers and everything. But the locksmith was a very important member of a football, or if you're in America, soccer team. And because he missed a game, that team ended up losing. So when he got back, they gave him no end of shit, because you should not be the person who cost your team the game by not showing up. That is the worst thing in the world you can do. So to kind of save himself, he told them what he had been doing. A newspaper journalist heard it and was like, this sounds pretty interesting. Broke the story wide open. And now the Austrians could no longer deny that their top guy had given everything to Russia.
And so the spy mania.
So they tried to blame it on him being gay.
Yeah, and the spy mania started. So everybody was talking, but this had been in the works for a while. The end of the 1800s, the end of the 1890s was the Dreyfus era. That ripped everybody apart. Talking about Dreyfus. There were other scandals going on in the meantime. And Radel himself had, we'll say this, uncovered several Russian spies. They were spies that the Russians considered expendable, but he got a lot of credit for that. Yeah,
and
a truly ruthless action by the Okhrana, which would be duplicated later by the NKVD, the KGB, the MGB, every Soviet spy agency.
Yeah, and they had like 6 different acronyms that they just changed their name constantly. The rebranding was insane.
Yeah, but interestingly, that giving away lesser spies, I mean, it shows such a callousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such an awfulness toward your own side, but it was
okay.
It was a sign of a sign of professionalism in their minds.
Yeah. So one would think that this would be the end of the issues with the Radel story, but they're not, because the government allowed Radel's belongings to be auctioned after they had taken their locksmith in and gathered all the papers and photographs. none of which have been declassified, by the way. You cannot go see these because apparently, 110 years in the future is not enough time for the damage to be mitigated. But so then they auctioned everything. And then they had to go find everything and buy it back because it turns out they had auctioned off a lot of stuff that was, I don't know how you would say it, a value.
Yeah.
Not a value, but not of intelligence value. No. What's it called? Compromat.
Compromat.
Yes. So they had auctioned off a lot of that. And they weren't alerted to this issue until a school teacher who had bought one of Radel's cameras. It came with two things of film.
Rolls of film.
Yeah. Well, were they rolls of film
They were
then?
rolls. Yeah, even back then.
Okay. Well, two things of film that had been used but not developed. And he developed them. And he was like, oh, good, no, this is not for me. And he took it himself to the military. And they were like, oh, crap. What else did we let get by?
But the conclusion that they drew, that the Austrians drew, was quite opposite of the conclusion that the Brits drew. So the conclusion that the Austrians drew was the reason that he was spying is because he was lower class.
Yes.
We can't allow these lower class people. We have to have all good upper class people, like Anthony Blunt, Kim Philby, Don McLean, those good kind of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
People from good families.
I think that this is their delusion. Yeah. They never drank that final glass that let them know that upper class elite people can be shitty too.
Yeah.
So I guess it's time for our final glass. Honestly, I feel this one much more than I feel the Terranino. Oh, we didn't. Belated. Final thoughts?
So my final thought is money, ideology, coercion, and ego exist as a possibility for everyone. And no one as a category can be excluded from suspicion when things start going wrong.
Okay. My final thought is they disgust me. That's my final thought. Okay. Maybe it's the takeaway, but that truly is my final thought, because these people gave up their own, not their evil own. They weren't whistleblowers, and anybody who tries to frame it as a whistleblower situation where people were being saved because they went and said this stuff and did this stuff and gave away this stuff, that's a lie. They were awful. They were horrible people.
Yeah.
End. That's it.
That's it.
The final glass.
What to do